I would have much more respect for Pritzker if he'd call me up and say, I have a problem. Can you help me fix it? I would be so happy to do it. I don't love, not that I don't have, I would have the right to do anything I want to do. I'm the president of the United States. If I think our country's in danger, and it is in danger in these cities, I can do it. No problem going in and solving, his difficulties. But it would be nice if they'd call and they'd say, would you do it?
Donald Trump, he could do whatever he wants. He's the president. It'd be nice they asked him. Just come on, be nice. Have you ever seen a more fragile effing ego in your life? I mean, is this the most fragile human to ever serve in that office? I've never seen somebody so openly pathetic as Donald Trump when he talks. And it's funny, I can't get over how many people think he's strong and tough. The guy's pathetic. He's a loser. But that's what he does. Well, it'd be nice if they asked me to solve their problems. Here's J.B. Pritzker, the actual governor of Illinois. Is an actual leader. Here's his response right here in the Midas Touch Network.
The city of Chicago isn't even in the top 25 most dangerous violent crime cities. So he needs to do a little reading. I know he doesn't do much of that. And instead, maybe someone can inform him of what the facts are. But he seems a little obsessed with me and with Chicago. Maybe he's got Pritzker derangement syndrome, but maybe, again, he could just, take a beat, learn a few things, and focus elsewhere, maybe on protecting the country from the axis of evil that is beginning to form between China, Russia, North Korea, and they're drawing in India now.
Yeah. I don't think JB seems too worried about Donald Trump wanting to ask. Yeah, he's absolutely right. While Trump's so obsessed about looking tough here and worried about the Kennedy Center or the Rose Garden, our enemies are gathering in China. Kim Jong-un, Russia, Putin, Xi, they all hung out together. I had a parade. Boy, was Trump jealous of the parade. He really wanted a big parade. This guy and his fragile ego are incredibly dangerous. He's been talking about Chicago endlessly and all the cities he wants to invade. How dare governors and mayors tell him what to do? Here he is again. And then, well,
can't walk outside. We're petrified. If the governor of Illinois would call me up, I would love to do it. Now, we're going to do it anyway. We have the right to do it because I have an obligation to protect this country. And that includes Baltimore. I saw where Governor Moore was asking me to take a walk down the street of Baltimore. Well, Baltimore is a very unsafe place. It's rated number 4 in the city. One of the most unsafe places anywhere in the world.
Also a fucking lie. Baltimore's gotten safer. The new mayor's doing an incredible job because you know why? Anti-crime isn't just police. Safety in our communities isn't just police and more guns. Okay? It also involves undermining the underlying social things. It is about affordable housing. It's about jobs. It's about providing healthcare and opportunities so that crime isn't the path. Anybody who studied crime for even a second knows this. Basic Sociology 101 teaches this, that when people have opportunity, they turn away from crime. Trump doesn't like that. It's not tough. It's not tough. Here's tough people. Here's Mayor Johnson of Chicago on Trump's obsession with showing up in his city as the city has lowered their crime rate to the lowest in decades, as they worked very hard. And if you know the situation in Chicago, a very big city, 2.5 million people or more, plus the surrounding counties. If you know Chicago, while guns are illegal, not illegal to a great extent, but are much more harder to get, they're not in the neighboring states. They're just a few miles away where they're flooding the streets. That's the issue where the guns are coming from. They're not coming from Illinois. Here's the mayor.
We've said fund our education system, invest in affordable housing, ensure that we are collaborating to get guns off the streets of Chicago. We're stopping guns being trafficked in from states that voted for him. And so now we do all of this hard work, this group assignment in the city of Chicago, and he wants to come at the end of the year before the assignment is due to try to put his name on the paper. He is reckless and out of control. He is the biggest threat to our democracy than we've experienced in the history of our country.
Sums it up perfectly. Donald Trump is the threat. And the threat is true violence here in the streets of America. And we've been talking about here on the show for a while, haven't we? You've seen multiple guests and me talk to you about how my aversion to violence after having served in combat in Baghdad many times, in Iraq, in Desert Storm before that. I have seen what happens when violence is the norm. I have seen what happens when political differences are solved with a gun. It is a dangerous morass we will not climb out of. And you're seeing it in the world right now, such as Gaza. You're never gonna kill your way out of these things. So the idea that injecting troops and masked men with no badges invading our streets of one of our country's largest cities, the second or third largest city in America, is going to make it better is delusional. And as always, I have the perfect guests this week. I'm thrilled to have Professor Robert Pape. You've seen him before the show if you've watched it for a while. More importantly, he's the head of the Chicago program on violence. It is amazing what he does at CPOST. We've also got Senator Tammy Duckworth, the senator from Illinois, to discuss this. So we've got a jam-packed show this week. I hope you stay for the whole thing. It's worth it. It's educational. It's eye-opening. This is going to be some great conversations. Bob is brilliant. Of course, Senator Tammy Duckworth, one of my favorite elected members of Congress. And of course, a fellow Blackhawk pilot herself. So a lot to talk about this week. I'm thrilled you're here on Friday night, 7 or on the weekends. As always, I am Fred Wellman, host of On Democracy with FP1. You're right here on the Midas Touch Network. Be sure to hit subscribe and like. Be sure to follow all of our other channels we're at. We're everywhere. In the meantime, let's get on the show. This is going to be a good one. Welcome back. I am still Fred Wellman, as I was 15 seconds ago. I told you in the intro, there's some crazy moment going on in our country right now as Donald Trump threatens cities across the country, specifically Chicago more than any. We have a full packed show to discuss the moment we're in. And frankly, the timely show that we could actually change this course of history and the direction as our cities are threatened by Donald Trump. And it's up to us. And that's why we're here at the Midas Mighty. You're here live with us on a Friday night. As I mentioned, I've got two great guests. First, we're going to start off with, as a course, we're going to talk to Senator Tammy Duckworth, who took time to talk to us. But we're going to start off with my good friend, Dr. Bob Pape. Bob is a professor of political science at the University of Chicago. And more importantly, he's the director of the Chicago Project on Security and Threats, also known as CPOST. Professor Pape studied political violence for 30 years, conducted extensive national surveys, studies on the rise of political violence, American political violence over the past 5 years. I think Bob was telling me the pre-show he's done 4 New York Times op-eds this year. His latest came out just today, because as you guys know with On Democracy, timing's everything. So let's not waste any time. I really want to talk to Bob. You're going to want to talk to Bob. We were in the pre-show. I said, Bob, stop talking. We got to put this on air. And so welcome to the show, Dr. Pape, Professor Pape. He correct me every time. Just call me Bob. All right. It's great to have you back, Bob. Thank you so much for jumping.
Thank you so much, Fred. And timing is everything. And now is the time. The Trump administration is sending us down a dark road in Chicago and for the country as a whole. It's not yet too late. We can do something about it, which we'll talk about in just a few minutes. But I also want to be clear right up front that I live in Chicago. I've lived in Chicago for over 25 years. There's no one I've ever met in Chicago that likes crime in Chicago. When I worked at university,
Weird, right?
this is not the issue. It is definitely true that people in Chicago don't like crime, but they hate a military occupation and they hate a police state even more. And we will have data on that I'll talk about in just a minute. Now, the first thing I want to let your audience know, Fred, is that, as you said, I've been studying political violence for 30 years. My specialty for 20 years has been military occupations. So not just political violence in general. Now, I started doing this right after 9/11. That's when I started to publish multiple books on terrorism. And what people will find as soon as they start to Google me, even before they don't have to buy the books, although please do, they can go and they will see that my big argument, which I made as we were invading Iraq, is that military occupation by democracies tends to be a special risk factor for creating violence. Even when they go in to suppress the violence, it makes things worse very, very often. Now, if you understand that, then you would say, well, then, Professor Pape, if we invade Iraq and we occupy Iraq, we're a democracy, wouldn't we touch off a large terrorist campaign? And yes, and I predicted that in advance. This was my big claim to fame, Fred. And I'm sorry to be not so humble on your show, but it's important that your folks know that while all the other terrorism experts were saying we could have a cakewalk, we're going to go in there, Saddam Hussein, not a problem. We're going to, Paul Wolfowitz was saying they all love us. They're going to throw flowers at our feet. Doesn't this sound a bit like President Trump? Okay. I was saying it won't take long before there's a massive anti-American, anti-troop campaign, and it took about 3 or 4 months to get going, and then once it got going, it didn't really stop until we left.
I was that guy, Bob. I was that guy. As you know, I participated in the invasion of Iraq. I moved up. We occupied Mosul and Nineveh province, and we started getting rockets and bombs about 4 months. And something, this conversation a lot.
Accomplished. We could say all these things, but now here's the things that we need to know. That's not just about the invasion of Iraq. If you look at Northern Ireland, another famous case, in August 1969, there is sectarian violence, and the British send troops to go in to de-escalate the violence. Their mission was to de-escalate the violence. Well, needless to say,
everybody knows that people with guns de-escalate violence. Yeah, it's famous.
You had, now, I know quite a bit about these cases. Turns out that after the British troops went in, 13% of Catholics supported the use of force to kick them out. Within 4 months, the provisional IRA was founded. What was their goal? Use force to kick the British troops out. Then more troops had to go in. You got this cycle of violence here. So basically, what happens when democracies, either when they do this abroad or when they do it within their home territory, that part of their state, and they use military forces for not really police reasons, but to basically have the national government impose order on a local community, not temporarily, mind you, but for a long time. What that tends to do is it tends to make the local population think they're under military occupation. Now, the occupier, the troops never say that they are. They just don't say it. They don't call themselves occupiers. But the local population starts to see that they are losing control of their freedom to choose their own futures in many ways. Now, at first few weeks, first few months even, things can go reasonably well, because after all, it's not always the case that these democracies are behaving badly. Sometimes, like we did in Iraq and the British in Northern Ireland, there was actually a reason here. But what
I build schools and clinics.
Balance shifts over time, so that it starts out where there's this purpose, but then as the weeks go on, as the months go on, you can't really pull the troops out, because then everything will just go right back the way it was before. You've got to stay, and as you stay, it's a democracy. There are elections. People who are running in those elections start to complain, my supporters can't have the rally that we want to have. The get out the vote campaign can't go the way I want it to go. The supporters start to feel this way. So basically, the infringement on political liberties grows the longer and the more expansive the troops are there. Now, in the case of Chicago, which is going to be different than the other cases, every case has some unique features, right? There's no like cookie cutter that's one size fits all, but it has a lot of unfortunate similarities here that really are quite worrisome. And the first thing has to do with the number of people in Chicago that already don't want this.
Now, and you did. Now, I just want to cut you off. So that's a perfect place to pivot. So, as we've seen this, and we see it in Gaza right now, we could touch on Gaza in this sake. It causes more violence. It's an endless cycle of violence. Something I say in speeches here in Missouri is how I've seen occupation. I've been a part of an occupying force. there's an endless cycle of violence. When you kill one person, you create 3 more insurgents. I mean, this applies fill in the blank. And now, of course, we have troops in DC who are being spit upon and treated ill. And it's not, these are National Guardsmen. I mean, these are our sons and daughters. They didn't volunteer to go there. Okay. These aren't stormtroops style, and so just our kids, they don't want to be there either. They'd rather be home in Mississippi. They're not enjoying themselves. You really think a kid from Mississippi wants to go to DC to pick up garbage? So that circles us here because there is a growing discontent. And then, of course, you're in Chicago. There's a difference in Chicago and DC. DC is a federal district, all those things, right? I mean, there's even a legal category for Trump to take over the police department of DC for 30 days. That is not the case with the sovereign state of Illinois and Chicago, a major city, who is, what do I want to say, 5 times bigger than
Chicago, but over 3.5. So
3 times larger.
DC is 700,000. The city of Chicago, somewhere between 2.5 and 2.7 million. So we could say 3.5 to 4 times.
Which, by the way, is a sprawling city. Doesn't just include the city limits. You're talking the city limits. If you know Chicago as I do, just like in St. Louis, we all call ourselves St. Louis. I live 20 miles from the town. But
and many of the operations are necessarily, as I'll explain with immigration, going to even be beyond Cook County. So so the big differences here between Washington and Chicago are not just the legal issues. Those are tight, just as you said. But Chicago is much bigger. This is a much bigger can of worms, so to speak. And it's not just the city of Chicago. So if we take, for instance, immigration. So as we know, President Trump's talking about remove, deport all the illegal immigrants. Well, how many illegal immigrants or undocumented immigrants are in Chicago and Illinois? Well, according to Pew, very reputable source just a few years ago, there are over 500,000 undocumented in Illinois. A big hunk of those, somewhere around 150 to 200,000, are in Chicago. Most of the rest are in the environments on the cusp or on the moon, the half moons around Chicago. So the DHS, they are going to Great Lakes. Your audience may not realize Great Lakes, this naval base, is to the north of the city of Chicago, but they are choosing this as a staging area because this is going to then cover Cook County, this is going to cover all of these counties that have large fractions of those undocumented immigrants. And look at the numbers we're talking about here. So this is not, so right now, this weekend, we're expecting something like 300 militarized, that is in military garb and probably having sidearms, of DHS troops in Chicago. But if you're really talking about deporting any sizable number here, you're going to need a lot more troops than that. You're going to need a lot more force than that, and you're going to need long periods of time. So the fact of the matter is the very big differences here between Washington and Chicago simply start with size. It's much more massive. And we're not yet even talking about the crime. So now we're going to add the crime mission on top of the illegal and undocumented deportation mission. You see what I mean? So now we're going to add the crime mission. Well, these are in different neighborhoods. So your audience can go to the city of Chicago has crime map. The University of Chicago has a crime lab with crime maps and analyses. And you will see they all basically paint the same picture. And you will see the very specific neighborhoods where murders are literally 30 times more common in certain neighborhoods than in the adjacent neighborhood. I used to live in Oak Park, which is to the west of the city, right next to Austin. I literally lived on Lombard Avenue that was only 200 yards from Austin Boulevard. Okay. So I know this pretty well. My kids went to school in the school areas here. And I'm telling you that when President Trump says there are places in Chicago that are like Baghdad, I not only know that because I studied Iraq and Baghdad, I know that because I live right there on the border. And the fact of the matter is, it is a very different world here, just literally a few blocks away. And so, if you want to have, as is happening now in DC, troops kind of parading by the mall, going to the metro stop, this will look good for show. You know, it's right issue signaling, and I'm sure Trump's getting good political benefits out of this and so forth. However, they're not going to the southeastern parts of DC. Okay, this is here the real problems are. Now, you might say, why is then there's crime going down? We're going to need months, Fred, for this whole idea that we're going to make these snap judgments about how we've sent this in, it's all done, you know, everything is over. No. There's whack-a-mole. There's Joe. We study these issues for real. And in order to actually understand if you're suppressing as opposed to simply moving or temporarily suppressing, you need months to be able to make these judgments here. And again, this is just in DC, where it's a much smaller set of issues. And back to Chicago, we haven't even talked about in Chicago the gang issue. 37%, all the murders that we are talking about here, for the last 20 years, there's great data on this that goes across different administrations in Chicago, including the Republican governor of Chicago. And what your readers and listeners will see online is great data showing that 37% of the murders in Chicago since 2004 have been gang related. Now, what does that mean? That means you've got to go and disarm those gangs. You've got to go and take those gangs apart. Those gangs might sit still for a week or two, a month or two, you know, but you pull out, those gangs are still there. See, this is what the British faced in Northern Ireland. Once
We faced in Iraq. I mean, come on, it's what we faced in Iraq. I mean, I'm sitting here laughing because that's exactly what we faced in Iraq, right? They'll wait us out. They've got a long-term memory. They've been there a long time. They know the rules. They know that Donald Trump can't keep military occupations in the city. And let's be honest, you're talking the size of Baghdad. And I was in Baghdad. We were in Baghdad for you could say 20 years. Did we ever pacify Baghdad really with all of our troops? Iraqi troops. At one point, I mean, at one point we had was it 200,000 troops just in Baghdad at one point? And then didn't pacify it, you know.
you're really going to pass a city thing, you're talking about 200 to a half million troops. That's delusional to think it blew down Southern. Well, that this is why this. Now, there's two other things I want to quickly say. One is we already have a good survey of attitudes in Chicago about this. We did this with my center, the University of Chicago Project on Security and Threats. Right after LA, we realized that something might be coming to Chicago. And so we did a representative survey of Chicagoans, which is really hard to do, Fred. Your listeners may not know, this is even harder than a national survey, to get a representative survey of a city. Well, did it with Newark, really reliable. And what it showed, the data was through July. So it was kind of started the end of June through July. And what the data showed is 60% of Chicagoans, that's over 1.3 million, already disapprove of how Donald Trump was handling deportations and immigration. It further showed that 28% of Chicagoans, which is about 600,000, said they would attend a protest against the deportations, even if it went violent. That's a big deal. And then 30% said that they thought it was justified for the undocumented immigrants to use force to defend themselves. Now, let's just pause for a moment here, okay? This is not good numbers for saying this is like we hear President Bush saying they're going to welcome us with flowers and it's going to be a cakewalk into Baghdad. So when President Trump says they're desperate to have him come, where's his numbers, Mr. President? Where are your numbers? My numbers have been published in the New York Times, and the top line you can find online in detail. Where are your numbers for Chicago, Mr. President? Let's really talk about the numbers here. And so that's issue number 2. And this is even before they've come. Okay.
Right.
Now,
And we literally showed a video of him. Oh, they want us. Everybody wants us. I'm
well, then let's call them in. And I'm
what was it? What did he say a few days? I didn't show the video. Like, there's black women calling me. They want to be safe in Chicago. It's like, whew, it's
the representative survey numbers, not a few cherry-picked people that we're seeing on Fox and so forth. This is very, very different. Now, there's another element, Fred, we need to be aware of, which isn't yet making it clear, but it will soon, which is the Illinois elections are coming soon. You see, the primaries are slated for March, and that means the campaigns and the get out the votes and fundraising, that's all getting started now. And so this is all going to get wrapped up into politics here. And so when President Trump, oh no, there's no politics. Why? How can it be you would send a significant military force to do a massive set of military missions, and it's going to have no influence on the politics of the city? In fact, President Trump himself on Wednesday evening, for his own fundraising, sent out a post saying that he is going to, quote, liberate, quote unquote, Chicago, and he means from the radical liberal leadership. Kristi Noem has used similar language, our DHS secretary here. So this isn't just sort of somebody Trump derangement syndrome. We're making up words here. That's not what I do. As you know, Fred, I've been on the last time we were on. What was my big pitch? My big pitch was no violence at the No Kings protest. I'm glad he talked to the Democrats about not being violent here. And in fact, I'm so pleased Governor Pritzker is using that mantra all the time now. So I am all down.
Peaceful and patriotic. That's what we're going to say. Peaceful and patriotic.
We talked to hundreds of thousands of people, as you know. Yeah. And this was a very, very peaceful weekend hopefully we helped a little bit. But what I'm saying here is this is now a message here that's got to be delivered really to the president and the White House and to the Republicans here. So this is a case now where you're sending now military force. Now, it's true. Right now, we don't know how much is really coming, okay? And that actually means there's an opportunity to head this one off at the pass, at least keep it as low level as possible. So let's assume right now there's 300 troops, militarized ICE agents, and they will have military garb. They might even have sidearms come to masks. Well, and masks. Okay, that's going to be scary, but that's not the same as thousands of ICE agents. There are 20,000 ICE agents in the country, so they could send 5,000 to Chicago, just to be clear. Okay, they could also send, as they have been threatening, the National Guard. That's what Trump says when he says we're going to go in. All right, and they could also send troops, actual Marines and other troops in. This is within Trump's power. Yes, we can fight in the courts, but while the court bells are going, this could actually happen. Well, we could I believe, it's not too late to head off the worst things that could possibly come. And the things that need to happen here are pretty straightforward, which is we need giant email campaign, internet campaign to the White House itself. So Fred, I'm hoping all the organizers of the No Kings protests and all the other protests are listening to this podcast, because there is actually something to do today, tomorrow, through early next week. And it is to flood the zone in the White House. Okay. The White House talks about flooding the zone. Well, there's another way.
And letters to the editor and social media.
Oh my gosh. Letters to
and it's very often, Bob and I are all time from our fellow Democrats.
I want to be clear, not just a Democratic congressman here who already basically agree. What are you going to move Senator Durbin? No, he's already erupted here.
You got Senator Duckworth on next.
She's good. Who's actually, and this is very, very important. And you might say, well, President Trump won't listen. Well, look, J.D. Vance wants to actually be president. Okay, at some point. It's not just about, there are a circle of people in the White House, and I'm not telling you that cooler heads will prevail, but there are actually substantial political interests at stake for Marco Rubio, for J.D. Vance, possibly for others here on the cabinet, and also other Republicans in Congress.
And you're on about Mike Boss. Mike Boss is down in Southern Illinois. You've got a couple of
What we've got to make clear, and that's why I wrote this piece in the New York Times and wanted it out today, not after the fact, is if there is escalation to violence in Chicago, it is Donald Trump's fault. You can't keep blaming the occupied community for not liking military occupation. Now, that said, if we do have violence, Fred, I want you to bring me back because I'm going to try to calm it down. So I am not in any way encouraging that, and I will do everything possible to try to limit this because this is good for no one. But it's not just bad for the Democrats. This is going to be bad for everybody, including any of the Republicans who think they have a viable future. And just think about the Republicans trying to run for office against Barack Obama in 2008 on Iraq. They had nothing to stand on. So 2004, President Bush gets reelected after he invades Iraq. That's great because it looks like, even though there was a dust up, it didn't get that bad yet. A few years later, no. Look at the British in Northern Ireland here. It's a mistake to only look at the near term here. These large-scale military deployments in these cities by democracies, they don't tend to go so well. And part of the reason is because there are elections. And those elections here then end up getting infringed upon, or people will come out and mobilize. And this is why democracies are particularly bad at these military occupations. We just shouldn't be in the business of doing them. We should be working with, as you're hearing, of course, the governor and the mayor, and I'm sure you will hear more. We should be coming up with very specific things. You're already starting to hear this out of the leaders in the city and the state.
Yeah, I ran a video. I ran a video of the mayor saying, here's what we need for you. We don't need your.
And there'll be more. And when they do events at the University of Chicago about this. So we are not just sitting here, in an ivory tower watching Rome burn or something. This is a very, very important thing. And it's important for the country. That's another key element here. What starts in Chicago isn't necessarily going to stay in Chicago. Let me just ask your listeners to imagine one thing. Imagine you have one either militarized DHS agent or National Guard troop shoot and kill just one protester. Just one. And imagine that is on video. And why might that be on video? Because we all have these things. Okay. Yeah. All of us have these things. And imagine that one video and what that could do as a flashpoint, not just in Chicago, but around the country, because this is the danger zone we're moving into. You've heard me talk about before that political violence can be thought of like a wildfire where you have this dry wood combustible material and these unpredictable matches can be thrown in and touch it off. Well, that's what happened in the George Floyd protests here, which also about 5 to 10% became violent. And that's also what could happen here as we go forward, because that combustible material now is really there. And you cannot stop all of those 20-year-olds pumped up with their adrenaline going. They're in a fog of conflict. There's gas moving around. They're not sure what's coming at them. This is the world we're starting to move into. And you don't want this to start, because once it starts, this is going to happen much more quickly than I think people realize.
Yeah. And that's a perfect place to start too, is the National Guard, of how our relationship with the National Guard is changing. Our next guest, Senator Duckworth, is a National Guard veteran. I'm a father of a National Guardsman who was actually at Unite Talk before. He was at the Unite the Right. My son-in-law was at the Unite the Right protest, guarding the damn statue, for God's sake. I mean, we're in a very dangerous mode, as well as our relationship with our own military, the respect that they have as arbiters of peace and security for the nation, as for outward threats. But Trump is putting them in a position of very dangerous. But even if they follow legal orders, these are legal orders at this point. But you hear about them being treated poorly by the locals because they're angry. They're angry at what seems to be an invasion, if you will, an occupying force. I do believe for you, and for it's not necessarily your specialty, but I'm very worried about the relationship we have with the United States military as a neutral force in our country, a non-political force. And they're clearly making a very direct attempt to politicize our military in a way that it's going to be very hard to unravel that when it's all said and done, isn't it?
And what is happening in the biggest of pictures, Fred, is our politics are being radicalized beyond any experience we have in our lifetimes. And so this is going to be the most difficult thing for all of the leaders because, this isn't like tariffs. So what happened in April, Liberation Day, is Donald Trump imposed a whole bunch of tariffs here and said, wait, all this. And then things didn't go so well in the bond market. Everything was crashing. So he pulled back and then they started to navigate this and the stock market is done actually okay. Maybe it's going to go south in the future. This isn't like tariffs. This isn't like, oh yeah, once you get those viral videos going, you have that again, just imagine. And there are dozens of potential flashpoints. I've just named one. Once that gets out there, this changes the relationship here between the military and our public in really powerful and potent ways. And that genie is not going back in the bottle because Donald Trump just suddenly decides he's going to call it off here. This is going to be very, very difficult. We've got to.
We paid for it. Remember Kent State? It was a decade. Yeah. It was over a decade and a half before we got back the reputation of the United States military after Kent State in Vietnam. And that's a very dangerous place. And this is an all volunteer military. These truly are our sons and daughters and our children. Bob, we've talked for a while now. So I guess the final thing I want to say is what's your call to action for these great folks watching us? What can we do? You've mentioned a little bit already, but more.
Really, the number one thing to do now, Fred, and I mean starting today for a week, is to flood the White House with every communication possible that President Trump, don't send the troops, the forces to Chicago. And just over and over and over again. And it's really not just for the individuals listening, it's for the organizers of what's been happening around the country here. This is the time. It's sort of like the modern version of a petition campaign, but you can actually flood the zone and we can make this really, really clear. And we have a lot of material now to work with. And that's why I'm glad you brought me on. I hope people will get a chance to look at that New York Times piece. It's chock full of a lot of information that will be important. But this is really this week, Fred, and it's almost going to be week by week, I'm sorry to say. Here, because what you're seeing is this whole issue of political violence in our country is evolving in dangerous ways. And so what there is to do is going to change week to week to week.
Wow. And last but not least, I want you to put up your social media at Professor Pape. And of course, what can they find at the CPOST website?
CPOST is just CPOST. If you put that in, or you type in Chicago Project on Security and Threats, or you type in my name, you will find CPOST. And you will see, Fred, we'll be putting this video on our.
And I appreciate that.
Here's my face. Well, it gets to a lot of audiences that you may not already reach. So,
who knew? This is fantastic. Bob, as always, a pleasure. I'm glad to have you become my resident political violence, domestic violence guy, and I can't thank you enough. And you're all baggers and benders.
Thank you.
My pleasure, sir. So good. Hang in there. We'll talk to you really soon, but we'll keep it the fight. I always like talking to Bob Pape. He's become my regular guest to talk about these issues in this political violence moment, and we are in a moment. And as I mentioned at the end there, I am very worried about the reputation of our National Guard and our military. And it matters so much. So it was really exciting for me to get the opportunity to talk to Senator Tammy Duckworth. To the transparency, we actually talked yesterday because her schedule is crazy, but I talked to her team and said, hey, do you want to talk about the National Guard as a veteran like me in Illinois? And we were very fortunate to have Senator Duckworth join us. So let's not even waste any time. Let's talk to Senator Duckworth. Look, there's film guests you don't actually need to do much of an introduction for. Senator Tammy Duckworth is that guest. Of course, she's an Army combat veteran, flew Black Hawk helicopters just like me. And of course, she is now serving in the United States Senate from Illinois, my neighboring state. So without further ado, she's got a busy week. Welcome, Senator Duckworth. Welcome to On Democracy. It's great to see you again, ma'am.
It's good to be on. Thanks for having me.
Obviously, I guess we could just jump right to it. I was talking to Professor Robert Pape this week about the fact that, the idea of deploying National Guard to Chicago ain't very popular. It's not wanted. Nobody wants it. You're back in DC now, and you've seen our fellow National Guardsmen, and you're a National Guard member yourself, or a veteran. I guess we'll start from the top. Is it horrifying to see our fellow soldiers standing around the streets of DC?
It's horrifying. The fact of the matter is, it's a waste of their time and it's a waste of their resources. They should be training for their wartime mission. And you know what they're doing? They're walking around picking up garbage because they're neither trained nor authorized to do policing functions. Even if they saw a crime happening, they're not allowed to make arrests. They're not allowed to fire their weapons unless they change, the president and our unqualified Secretary of Defense decide to change the rules of engagement and allow National Guard to start shooting American citizens on the streets of our cities. That's not going to work. And by the way, when Katrina happened, I don't know if you remember this, but when Katrina happened, some of the National Guardsmen actually had their weapons stolen from them because they were not allowed to fire. So, and so this recent Peak Hexeth order to allow National Guardsmen to carry their firearms is just asking for those firearms to be stolen. So it's absolutely ridiculous. And by the way, a lot of kids started school. I know my kids. I have a 5 and a 10-year-old. They started school in this last month. So think of all of those National Guardsmen and women who were away from home with their kids at their first day of school. It is an abuse of the patriotism of our men and women in the National Guard.
And that way, that's disrespect. I mean, for this, I know you've been very hard on Pete Hegseth. I cheer you on every time. I'm very difficult on him. I've known him for over a decade. He is the most unqualified Secretary of Defense I've ever seen. But he's obsessed with lethality. If I hear that term one more time, we're going to have to ban that word when he finally does quit or resign or get fired, right? This isn't lethality. This is the most ridiculous thing, right? I mean, the idea they're trying to tie it all together somehow, this is taken away from that very mission, isn't it?
Well, yeah, if he cares about lethality, then don't send 700 Marines into Los Angeles. Send them to go do their, amphibious assault training, right? If you want lethality, then let the National Guard train to do its job, not walking around the reflection pool in Washington, D.C., picking up garbage. That's not what they're supposed to be doing. And you're wasting that resource. And so he's actually driving down readiness of our military by basically catering to this president's desire to become some sort of a Saddam Hussein-esque dictator. Every time Donald Trump has a bad news cycle and can't get Vladimir Putin to do what he wants to do, or looks up and sees Xi Jinping and Putin and these guys, have the military parade of his dreams, he does something like, I'm going to go and, invade Chicago. I mean, this is clearly a political ploy to distract the American people from his failures as president.
And one of the things I do want to and take advantage of you and your experience and your knowledge of, we're both veterans. We know our fellow soldiers. I've seen a lot of people, even on our side, on the left, saying, oh my God, this is it. This is the military takeover, martial law. I have greater faith in our fellow service members that they understand the law. I mean, and there isn't enough of them, to be honest with you, but that's not, our National Guard isn't going to be Trump's strike force. I don't feel like that's the threat here. The threat really is like intimidation and truly a waste of these great men and women and their resources. Isn't it?
Well, that's exactly it. It's really disrespectful to the people who, swear to defend this country. And it's disrespectful of their time. It drives down their readiness. Every day that they're walking around picking up garbage on the streets is a day that they're not training for their wartime mission. And it takes them out of the rotation for their train up, for these individual units. And it's a waste of federal resources. The deployment of the National Guard to LA costs something like $1 million a day to the defense budget. Imagine what we could have done with $1 million a day to support military families, what we could have done for our military men and women to support their needs. Think of all the barracks that could have been improved at the cost of $1 million a day. I sit on Armed Services Committee and I deal with this all the time. Like, how can we improve living conditions for our servicemen and women? How can we support their families? How can we improve DoD schools? What can we do to help their spouses get jobs as they go from deployment to deployment? We could have used that $1 million a day for some of those efforts, as opposed to having them stand and walk around a federal building in Los Angeles.
And the same goes for deployments to the border. The same goes for the deployments to support ICE operations and run camps. I know they're talking about using the naval station there, right there in the Chicago area as a base for ICE. I mean, these deployments of federal troops into your state are universally hated. I mean, from the city level all the way through your federal representation. Of course, Governor Pritzker has been very direct about that. Do you really believe that this is meant to create crime, or is it really meant as an intimidation tactic, or maybe even a practice session for the election time?
Oh, this is all a run up to them trying to suppress the election and try to rig
Yeah.
the election. This is all that they're doing. They're trying to get people normalized to seeing troops on our streets so that they can finally send them in on election day. And we're simply not going to let that happen. Remember that they're choosing to send ICE to Chicago just in front of our Labor Day celebrations that we're having this coming weekend. We have Eddie Fest, which is a great festival, lots of joy. We have Cinco de Mayo coming up. This is all, this is classic wannabe tin pot dictator playbook. And that's what this president's doing. And it's all geared towards suppressing the election and suppressing turnout in the midterms here in just under 14 months.
Yeah, I think that, and yeah, it's funny. I do talk to people. I have friends in DC who talk about. I just spoke to a friend who was Latino, and he said he's got a platoon of infantry like between him and the Capitol. So he didn't go to the press conference yesterday with the Epstein survivors. I mean, it's almost like a textbook of they suppress the people attending the Epstein survivors press conference by having these troops because people are worried, and that's the real fear. And I would be remiss if I let you go without asking about the other thing that's on the mind. Since you are on the Armed Services Committee, this attack on the Venezuelan speedboat by naval forces, we've seen very little. I mean, the DOD was basically just posting Trump's Truth Social post saying he ordered it and smoked him. You and I are both aviators. We both flew. There are certain rules of combat, rules of war, rules of engagement. Go to these things. It's almost shocking the idea that we went in international waters and killed possibly innocent people. We don't know that. Are you guys planning to investigate that and ask Pete Hegseth for more information, at least classified information?
Definitely, we are going to follow up on this because this is not just about going after. This is not about how bad these smugglers are. They're bad, and we need to go after them. But there's a procedure for doing that. When we do something like this in international waters, all we do is normalize our similar action by our adversaries, like China, like Russia, like North Korea. So the next attack that comes out of nowhere that attacks people without any warning, without any due process, could actually be, PRC attacks on U.S. interests abroad, and that this action puts our service members, puts Americans at risk around the world.
Yeah. And we are tying us all together. It feels like, one of the things I've been saying in my speaking is that, a lot of people say to us, I'm sure you hear it all the time, man. I think you heard it right here in Missouri when you visit us. People keep saying, well, when's the military going to stand up to them? When's the military going to start disobeying orders? I've been saying, actually, I kind of want them to hold their powder dry, if you will, for truly an illegal order that needs to be like, we draw the line here. It almost feels like we're getting close to that red line, possibly, aren't we? I mean, when we're being ordered to destroy boats, international orders, we're ordered to put people in the streets of our own country. Do you feel like maybe as a veteran yourself that maybe that red line might be fast approaching?
Well, we have a ruling in the courts that says that the deployment of the National Guard to Los Angeles was illegal. I do want to say something for everyday Americans out there. If you see these National Guardsmen on the street, please don't harass them. Please don't go up to them and tell them to quit their jobs. They can't quit their jobs, right? They're following a legal order from their commanders, and their commanders, and all the way up to the commander in chief. Until those orders are ruled illegal, they must follow these orders. Otherwise, they could be court-martialed and even jailed. So the best thing we can do with our National Guardsmen is treat them with respect and know that they're not there because they're choosing to be there. They're there because they swore an oath to this country to protect and defend us. If we are mad about what is happening, we need to focus our energy, and we need to focus our efforts at the person occupying the White House right now. So let's not harass our National Guardsmen and women, but at the same time pursue justice where we should be pursuing, like we did have this victory in the courts that did rule that the basically invasion and occupation of Los Angeles is illegal.
I Perfect. I appreciate you saying that. That's been a frustration of mine as well. These young men and women are doing their jobs as ordered. There's nothing illegal about that, and they still deserve our respect. That's probably the thing that worries me the most, is that this is going to hurt the image of good men and women, patriots who've stepped up to serve their country. They're being thrown into a political environment that was not their choosing, and I'm so glad you said that. Ma'am, I know you've got to run back to the floor and do things. I will let you go. Thanks for joining us here on Democracy. We appreciate you keeping up the fight for us.
Thank you.
That was a great place to finish up the entire episode with what Senator Duckworth said there. I feel the same way. I've seen so many of our peers, activists, good-hearted activists, even my fellow veterans who are in DC, they really have been, kind of yelling at the National Guardsmen. I've seen civilians yelling at the National Guardsmen. Look, there's a lot of people on the streets there. ICE, DHS, I question them. Some of them are behaving in really poor fashion. Our National Guardsmen to date, we have not heard any reports of National Guard members acting inappropriately with their civilians. They're not allowed to arrest people. They're not picking people off the streets. In many ways, they're as much a victim of this ridiculous use of force as we are as civilians watching them. So I would urge you to at least try and speak respectfully. Do not curse them or spit on them or treat them ill. I am ready to bet my Lego left foot that the National Guard members don't want to be there as much as you'd want them there. The idea, imagine yourself, you've got a family, you've got young kids, you've got a real day job. You join the National Guard to serve your community and serve your nation in times of emergency. That's why they exist. Flooding, tornadoes, whatever needs to be done. And instead, you've been deployed by your idiot governor, like Mississippi and other states, and sent to Washington, D.C. to not patrol, stand around. And then when make it even worse, they make you carry a weapon that you can't use. And then they make you clean up garbage in the national parks. And why is there garbage in the national parks? Because the idiot president and Doge and Elon Musk and Big Balls fired all the people from the national park service that do that for a living. So while I am aggravated at this deployment, you should be respectful of them. I hope you'll remain respectful of our National Guard members. They are truly our sons and daughters, and they're not there by choice. Okay, they really are. It's a legal order. Is it a good order? No. Is it ethical? Hell no. Is it appropriate? Absolutely not. Is it legal? Yes. And so I would really want to echo what Senator Duckworth said, because she's a brilliant veteran, that please, if you get the opportunity, thank them. Bring them a sandwich. Because you know what? If there's an emergency, a real emergency, they're going to come back and they'll be there for us, like they were after January 6th. So having said that, it was a wonderful place to finish our brief interview with the senator. I hope you enjoyed this episode, Doctor. Obviously, Professor Pape is a brilliant guy. I love talking to him. I could talk to him forever. I could get more time with Senator Duckworth, but we literally squeezed that in between her rushing between votes and the things she has to do. So I just can't thank her enough and Professor Pape for joining us. Again, as always, I am Fred Wellman, host of On Democracy, FP Wellman, right here on the Midas Touch Network every Friday night at 7 p.m. Eastern. So good to see so many of you joining us live. I hope you'll watch over the weekend. I hope you'll share it. Let your friends know about the show. We're so proud to be part of the Midas Touch Network as they grow, as we continue to take on the threats to our democracy. In the meantime, as I always say, folks, get in the fight. Use that energy, the energy that took us out of the streets on No King's Day and so many other times, that energy that's pushing back on this administration. Use that energy into the election. Look, I know it's easy to say defeatism, surrender. I'll put up my Substack one more time for you. I just wrote a piece about how defeatism is self-fulfilling. So don't be that guy or girl. Don't throw your hands up. We have to fight this. I'm fighting in Missouri right now to stop the redistricting of my own district. And so we have to keep up the fight. And it works. It does work. But in the end, we must believe in our democracy. We must believe in the elections. We must move forward. And you can do it. There's not a campaign out there that doesn't need your help. So in the meantime, go ahead and subscribe to our Substack, fpwellman.substack.com. There's a lot of cool stuff happening. I've got a really big announcement coming in about 3 weeks. I hope you'll be present for that. I'm very excited to share some exciting news with you when it comes. It's hard to believe, but we'll be doing some really cool stuff coming out that I know you want to be a part of. In the meantime, as always, like I said, every Friday night, right here in the Midas Touch Hour. I'm Fred Wellman. I'll see you guys soon. Thanks for joining us.